want to thank Global Legal Tech Hub so much for hosting us in this truly global discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about generative AI and its impact on legal services in the US and Canada. And we have some fantastic experts here to help us learn more about this and how things have progressed over the last 9 months. It has only been 9 months since ChatGPT dropped. Generative AI has actually been with us for much longer than that, but I think everybody's first experience was in November of last year, and we've seen how that's played out. And it seems like it's kind of been in dog years with the effect that it's had, with multiple developments happening and dropping each day. So we're going to talk about all that and how it's affecting the provision of legal services. So first off, I want to introduce you to each of our panelists. We have Natalie Anne Knowlton, who is the founder of Access to Justice Ventures, Amanda Brown, who's the founder and executive director of Lagniappe Law Lab, Aleksandr Tiulkanov, who is the founder of Responsible Innovations, and Sam Harden, who's a program manager at Pro Bono Net. But to give you a little more of an introduction, I'd like to first go through each of our participants and have them introduce themselves and give us a little more background. So let's start with you, Sam, and we'll go down kind of in the Brady Bunch arrangement that we have right. Go on.
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting me. I'm Sam Harden. I'm based in the United States. I'm a program manager with Pro Bono Net. Pro Bono Net is a national nonprofit that creates legal technology products that help the people that help people. For instance, we develop things that help pro bono attorneys organize, mobilize, and share knowledge, as well as people seeking legal information, understand and know the law. I've been working at Pro Bono Net for a little over 3 years. I'm a licensed attorney in Florida as well as a computer developer. So I'll pass it off to Natalie, I think.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Knowlton. I am also based in the U.S. I'm the founder of Access to Justice Ventures and a principal consultant there. We work with legal technology companies, lawyers, and other entrepreneurs who are building scalable access to justice solutions. And our focus area is mainly in areas of regulatory flexibility and innovation in the U.S., which are increasing in number. I hail from academia. I spent many, many years at a university-based nonprofit dedicated to access to justice and research. So I have a good understanding of the literature and have done empirical research myself into the experience of what it's like to be a consumer in the United States, moving through the system without legal help. I'll pass it to Aleksandr.
Hello, everyone. Thanks. My name is Aleksandr Tiulkanov. I'm an independent AI data and policy advisor. And previously, I was employed in different multinational companies, such as Deloitte. I have worked as a consultant. I have worked also as an in-house lawyer, and generally, I have a legal background. And I also recently worked at the Council of Europe in digital policy on matters related to AI regulation.
All right, and I think I'm last but not least. I'm Amanda Brown, the founder and executive director of Lagniappe Law Lab. Lagniappe Law Lab is a justice technology nonprofit that really operates in the Louisiana civil justice system. So we primarily focus on developing and providing tools for the public to understand and learn about their legal issue, take action on them through self-help tools, and connect to our network of civil legal aid organizations in the state. But we also do some more strategic and higher level work within the state, working with our Access to Justice Commission to think about how we can scale and deploy technology at scale to serve Louisiana's underprivileged populations.
Well, thank you all for the introductions, and you in the audience, I think you can see why I invited each and every one of these panelists. They are leaders in what they do, and we're going to have a great discussion with their contributions to it. So first off, we're talking about generative AI, right? And it's been around for a while. There's various different definitions of it. And Sam, I know that besides being a lawyer, that you're also a developer. And so if I could pick your brain to start with about how would you define generative AI, just to give us kind of like a table set, or level set, I should say.
Yeah, and I guess you're picking on me to go first here. So generative AI, as I understand it, is, like in the name itself, it generates text based on the inputs that it's given and the training and data set that it's fed, essentially. One way that I explain it to attorneys that don't have very much familiarity with it is when you type in a text message on your phone, the little suggestions that come up, like the next word that it thinks you're going to type, or in Google Docs, or the, Outlook says, swipe right to complete the sentence kind of thing. That's generative AI. It's predicting the words that will come next based on the words that have come before. We've seen this kind of AI, for a couple of years now, but nowhere near the scale that we have now. Previously, it was limited to things like text generation or, like completing the next one or two words in a sentence. But now we see its ability to complete entire documents based on suggestions, and do a lot of other things as well.
Fantastic. And I don't want to belabor the point, but if anyone else wants to jump in and kind of like tweak that definition, does anybody have a different take on it or want to expand it?
It's just maybe I would add that basically the idea behind the generative AI models, which are a type of machine learning models, is that basically they aimed at identifying patterns and structure in the input training data they are fed initially, and then exactly what you said earlier, like they generate new data with similar characteristics based on what the training data set was.
Cool. I mean, one little thing I would add to it is that in coming out with ChatGPT, where we also had that marked difference in like its fluency, and ability to answer intelligently, is the human reinforcement learning, right? So like in addition to the probabilistic determination of what text you would likely want, they also had human feedback to make sure that it was fitting our expectations. And that's why I think it had that more human touch when it came out. But I want to move from that to like, okay, so we have this thing, generative AI. The public consciousness about it is new, although it has been around for a while. And now we've seen kind of it cascade through legal and how that's affecting things in terms of maybe not necessarily the practical day-to-day, but at least in what we have to think about as new issues and how it can affect things, and some early adopters are using it. So this is what I call the Gen AI, like in the wild section. Like, what are some examples that you've all seen of the use of generative AI where it's actually being used by lawyers or people needing to access legal information in the wild right now? Good, bad, ugly. Let's start with you, Amanda. Have you seen anything out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, I have a unique focus on the legal aid system, and I will admit, I think that that's a little behind in this exercise. If you can imagine, this is the age-old issue that lawyers always say, oh, I don't have time to sit and learn that, but that's really very true for legal aid attorneys. The reality is that organizations like mine or like Sam's, or organizations that are specifically focused on applying technology to the legal aid, to the access to justice field, are really using it in a number of ways. For example, in my organization, we're using it to develop additional content. So what was a process that would take a long time to create a first draft and go out to expert reviewers and get feedback and come back, do a plain language review, has really been truncated to saying, what is it that what's the question that we're trying to answer here? What information are we trying to provide? Applying that to the framework of content development that we already have and getting a draft of that within minutes, literally. So it's really giving us the ability to expand on the amount and volume of content that we're able to provide and produce. Still, of course, making sure that we're having those checks in there with subject matter experts, using our own knowledge as attorneys to validate that, and then considering our audience and making sure that we're speaking to them in a way that doesn't sound like a robot. That is how we're looking at it. But I also see other applications coming out that I'm personally excited to try, that's integrating this technology directly into document automation. I will also use it myself for some of those more strategic aspects of the work that I do, developing data metrics and trying to create new things. That's what it's for. It's for solving that blank page problem, but it's really expediting the way that we're able to do that.
Just one other thing is we had a conversation offline where I think you're also using it for video, like.
Oh, yes. Yes, it goes to the content development piece. There are some applications out there. There's a lot of applications out there. Number one, let's get that out there. The AI bubble is here, and they're cranking them out. We have found some products that will allow us to take. We're using the content that we're developing, in some cases generated through a generative AI process. Using that, summarizing that, it will take that and turn it into a script and then associate it with particular images that are somewhat related. I'm going to say it's not amazing, but the fact that it can create those sections for you, and really we just go in and say, I don't like that photo or that video. Let me change it out really quickly. What took us $25,000, weeks of script writing and storyboarding to produce a video and service a process, we did in 15 minutes. So that was a huge shift. And for $60 a month, you can't really complain about. Maybe there's definitely an argument to be made that the quality of that $25,000 set of videos was better. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about serving people that need access to information, that's not a sustainable, scalable solution. This is.
Wow, that's a lot of value for sure. Does anybody else have any examples that they've seen of generative AI like that's actually having some impact? Sam, how about you?
At Pro Bono Net, because we're a tech provider to legal aid organizations and to nonprofits and government entities, we aren't currently deploying generative AI out there in the field, but we are testing it to see what its capabilities are. And seeing, where are the areas that it would be useful? Where are areas where it's not useful or it creates more complications or, like roadblocks to people looking for legal information? I think what Amanda said about, you can have a $60 a month subscription or a $25,000 video production timeline is an incredible point, because in legal aid, there's a lot of efforts that, have to go look for funding. They, take a lot of time to develop. They take a lot of resources. And then, some are very successful, some are not as successful. But to be able to iterate quickly, which is what this technology can allow organizations to do, is a force multiplier, in my opinion. And what Amanda is doing is just a great example of that. To be able to test something out at $60 a month versus, we've got to go, spend 6 months to 12 months doing this is great. One of the ways that I've, seen it have incredible potential is translating legalese into plain language. In legal aid, and especially in legal information, we have subject matter experts that are incredible at knowing the subject matter, but not as incredible at writing it in a way that everyone can understand it. Being able to take a very dense document or set of instructions or documentations and feed it into an AI model and have it come back with, here's a bullet point outline, here's the 5 steps that you need to do, is incredible, because generating content in legal aid is very difficult. And as to Amanda's point as well, that's another area that we've seen a lot of promise. We're not using it in the field, but we are, trying things out and experimenting with it in-house.
So, okay, let's take kind of a counterpoint maybe of like a bad example. And I think, Aleksandr, I should ask you about that because I know with the responsible innovations, it's a very necessary, critical function, but a productive one because you need to make things better. Are there any examples that you've come by of like, generative AI in the wild that are maybe not having the best impact?
Sure. I think by now almost everybody is aware of this notorious Avianca case where like a lawyer used one of the generative AI tools, but unfortunately the problem was like he was not aware in what way those generative AI tools are different from previous rule-based systems, which people are accustomed to. They know how they work, and that was a problem with this Avianca case, where a lawyer basically used ChatGPT to try and come up with some case law in his research, and he was trying to find what could support his position in the court. But the main issue was that he did not verify the information which was coming out of ChatGPT, and basically put all the outputs basically wholesale into the court documents, and that was the main problem of that particular situation with Avianca case, because obviously while these tools such as ChatGPT and other similar tools, like they can be very useful when used properly, this was obviously not a proper use of the tool. That is basically, by now I saw that I created a flowchart almost half a year ago, and I saw it propagated very widely across the LinkedIn network at least, and it basically stated the main thing lawyers need to know about using the tools. So you must verify everything. Like whatever is going to be generated, you must verify it before you publish it, submit it to someone else, and so on. And this is one of the problems. So basically, the tendency of the generative AI systems, like the nature of the algorithms which are used there, they can produce so-called hallucinations, and you need to be aware of this. It's an inherent flaw of those systems, and you need to be sure not to use any output in any serious use case which could result in serious consequences for you or for your client without any verification, right? And then, of course, another thing which I wanted to underline is you need to be very careful about what you input into the system, especially if you are using some of those popular web interface based systems where you are basically submitting, whatever you want, and you may not be sure that the information will not be later on used for, for example, subsequent training of those AI systems, meaning that if you are not careful enough, and if you do not redact the information which you are providing as input, like you're providing, let's say, real client names, real like commercially confidential information and so on, or any other kind of privileged information without any redaction, editing, anonymization, you need to know that according to the terms and conditions of those popular web services, your data will be used for AI training, and they will you will be incorporated as the next learning data set. And there are already techniques which are being explored which allow malevolent people to try and extract that information later on. So it's not guaranteed, but it's an issue, and you need to be just mindful of that possibility.
For sure. And actually, that image that you mentioned was how I came to know you first off, where it's basically, if you haven't seen it, it's like a little flow chart. If then, like, if you want it to be reliable, then maybe don't use ChatGPT. Maybe we could share that afterwards. It's really kind of funny. And actually, I do have to confess myself that when we first started experimenting with generative AI at LawDroid, we did have hallucinations occur. And it's a learning experience. So if anyone out there is, starting out, it's a terrible thing that happened with the Avianca case, especially when it's brought to your attention, you don't check, and it's brought to your attention, you don't check, and so on. You really need to take that seriously. But, if you're starting out and you're having this experience, just learn from it. Just try to figure out how to protect yourself and have some checks in place so that when you use generative AI, that you're being responsible about it. But Natalie, I'm really interested to hear any examples that you might have seen in the wild of either good or bad use cases of generative AI.
Well, I would just, triple click on what Amanda and Sam have talked about in terms of content generation. And I really like what I was going to say initially. It's that question, and Sam really did a good job of parsing it out, or all the different steps that you go through in a workflow when it comes to generating content for users that don't have legal knowledge. And these AI systems are making that just almost instantaneous. So you can take a kind of piece of legacy content, enter it into some of these systems, and almost automatically you've translated it to a 5th grade or 3rd grade reading level, and you've made scripts that can then go immediately to avatars and videos. So I think that's what I'm seeing happen the most. And I think that's where, at least in the immediate term, that's where a lot of the promise is for distributing legal information.
Yeah. And, some of the things are not totally obvious that you all are doing. Like one might think that you just type in a question, right, to ChatGPT and expect to get a legal answer. But the idea of like actually creating content, and then not only creating the content, but having it corrected for different issues, like you mentioned, Natalie, about readability and all that. People don't realize that could really take a lot of time, or sometimes, old school, you'd have to employ a consultant to come in and like provide that kind of review and stuff. So it really helps to create value and cost savings for legal aid.
Something else that I would note, I don't know how I forgot, because I was literally doing this today. That's probably because it's new. But part of my work in the state of Louisiana is to help update and create court forms for self-represented litigants. And it's actually really surprising. You can instruct, ChatGPT. I use GPT-4 I pay for the premium version for better results. And I do think it matters, but kind of constricting the question to particular laws and asking it to develop you a draft petition or a draft form it's really powerful in that regard. It will give you a template that's, again, solving this blank page problem of trying to come up with something brand new, but producing that as a draft, and then once I'm able to refine it, even something today I tried was telling it, okay, well, now considering this, draft me the instruction sheet that I should attach to this form to help people understand how they should fill it out, but not just the actual act of filling out the form, but incorporating the knowledge base of, all right, this is the law, includes service instructions, include how you find your clerk of court and locate where you're supposed to file it. It's extremely powerful for a task like that as well.
Yeah, so that's where I'd like to go next is like we've seen these different examples of generative AI in the wild for legal, and just like Amanda pointed out about this additional use case for legal aid and just for the people really, because legal aid are for people that could qualify for legal aid, but there's also like an entirely unmet group of people between those that can't qualify for legal aid, but those that can't afford a lawyer. For all of them, what are some additional ways that generative AI, besides content generation, can help them? Is it form creation and form completion? Is generative AI really, does it lend itself to that? Or is it better to just use legacy systems for that? And what other examples are there that we can use generative AI to help the general population access legal services? Sam, what do you think about that?
So I'm going to answer your question in kind of a roundabout way. There was a TikTok video that because I am old now and I don't understand TikTok, I can't find anymore, but it was really illuminating to me. It was about a person in New York who was having problems with her landlord. She went to ChatGPT and asked it, write a letter to my landlord for me about these problems and make it sound like a lawyer. And it did. And then she told it, okay, take that and put in more legalese so it scares my landlord. And it did. And then she sent it to her landlord and her landlord took action and fixed the problems. I think, when, Amanda and I have been talking about how legal aid organizations are using it, everything we've been talking about is what I call back office. It's not stuff that's actually interacting with the consumer. I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of quality assurance and scoping and testing before anybody thinks about using it directly interfacing with a consumer unmonitored. But I think people are using it now. While we're talking today, I guarantee you there are people on ChatGPT asking it legal questions, having it create letters to their landlord or to their loan, company or to their health insurance provider or something like that. And I think that's going on. I would bet money that that's going on. So I think people are using it to get legal help, even though they may not think of it as legal help. In the US, we have a very cloudy, amorphous idea of what is the practice of law. So I think people are using it. I think too, people use search engines like Google, like Bing, as their frontline interface for getting legal information or information about problems that they have. And one of the things that, I'm curious to see, and it kind of worries me, frankly, is what happens when Google does what Bing did and goes in on generative AI in search. How does that affect legal information providers that are out there, like Amanda's organization, trying to get people accurate legal information through their website? Are people still going to be able to get to that information, or are they going to stop at what Bing or Google's BARD or whatever they end up calling it tells them? So, I think that remains to be seen.
How about you, Natalie? What do you think about that?
I have some mixed opinions on this. I think in many ways, these tools are merely making it a lot easier for people to pull out information that's existing on websites that is imperfect and maybe not relevant to their jurisdiction or their particular situation. So in that sense, I think that these tools are a good thing. They're allowing people much easier access to information that's hidden. But then it does highlight that what we have given to most consumers in the US right now is nothing by way of legal information other than contact a lawyer. I might, pick on Sam again to talk about some of the things that he's been playing around with. in terms of asking legal advice and legal questions to these different tools. Because when I was looking at what Sam did, and I think you put it out a couple of weeks ago, there's a lot of talk in the regulatory field, and I think we'll get to this, but about how these tools might be giving legal advice. I spent a lot of time thinking about the distinction between legal information and legal advice. And one of the hallmarks is the optionality that legal information presents, the options and the choices. And then on the other end, legal advice is very much, you should do this, and it's a singular path, and people move forward with that path to the exclusion of the others. But what really struck me when I took a look at Sam's experiment that he's conducting, and maybe we can provide a link to that, is just a full range of optionality that is coming out in these very immediately generated simplistic answers that allow people to think through a lot of different options in terms of additional research that they might do, resources that they might connect to, routes that they might take. So I'm actually getting a little further away from the legal advice thinking when it comes to a lot of the way these tools are answering questions.
Yeah, and well, let's just jump into it about regulations, ethical rules. They seem, I mean, the entire discussion that I've heard from most of these panels that we've been either participating on or listening to is extremely attorney-centric, right? It's basically like, we have these rules, you can't do what you want to do, you can't help people because X, Y, Z. And I'd like to talk about it in terms of how consumers are actually affected. So let's not start with the definition of unlawful practice of law and then prevent that from having a discussion. Like Sam said, people are using this. The horse has left the barn. It's really a question of how does it get used in a way that really helps people, rather than somebody just trying to profit off of it to the disadvantage of people generally. So what if we look at it through that lens? What do we have to worry about? Like, what kind of protection should we have there for people to not be taken advantage of? I'll start with you, Aleksandr, because I know that with responsible innovations, you're thinking about these things. Like, what are some fundamental, at least a couple of ideas of what we should put in place to prevent people from getting hurt?
Yeah, thanks. I think it is very important to empower people with proper knowledge about how those generative AI system work, so that basically they will know what are the appropriate use cases for the technology, what are less appropriate, right? And they would need, they would know then basically to avoid such errors as those like even lawyers committed when using those technologies, right? So I think it's a great thing to have. Like really even public service announcements or some kind, or any kind of even government sponsored perhaps programs on educating people on how they can leverage this technology. Because exactly, I agree with the other colleagues who are saying like people are using it anyway, right? So we just need to let them know how to use it properly, because the technology is not anyone's enemy. It just needs to be leveraged properly. So I think here, and for people, the main thing for me, at least, in my opinion, would be not like education, but proper information. And this is, I think, key at the moment.
I would just jump in and echo, this is bigger than us. This is bigger than the legal profession. This is a fundamental shift in humanity, in society. And what we do is not going to stop people from using a tool that is easy for them to use when they're desperate. That's really what this comes down to, is that access to justice is a huge failure in the legal system's ability to serve people, and people are desperate for answers. this tool is in the public consciousness and people are aware of it, and it sounds good. It looks like a good response. You even might get good results out of it in Sam's example. But the flip side of that is that I would be curious to see what that letter produced, because I've tested this on my own, trying to say, are these document automations that I'm making, are in the legacy systems, as you call it, is this out of date at this point? And the reality is that even myself, as an attorney who knows how to instruct it to say, cite these specific laws and make sure that you follow this specific procedure that's within Louisiana law, it sounds really good. It even cites to the law, but it's the wrong law. Like, if it works and it scares someone into a response, that's great. But then you think about the catastrophic impacts on that person's life if it didn't work because the landlord said, oh, let me verify this, and determine they were wrong. Then this person is evicted, or other consequences can come from that. So I think this is, again, it's bigger than us, and maybe the legal community needs to come together. I think what we saw and what we see in the response to trying to prioritize information on Google. If you might recall, a couple years ago, and maybe even they're still doing it now, Stanford Legal Design Lab was having a conversation with Google about prioritizing information from trusted sources for legal information. This came out of a pandemic need where, again, the results were harming people that were just going to the front lines of Google and saying, what can I do? I'm desperate. I think that situation applies here. And as more and more people become aware of it and are convinced by the outputs, that similar situation is going to present itself. So I wonder if there's some consortium or some advocacy work that can be done from the profession side to go to these organizations who have really acknowledged that this is not perfect, that they're willing to work and make sure that this is deployed responsibly. If we can have that conversation and try and prioritize sources of information depending on the type of questions that's being asked.
It's a really great point, because it's not just about the lawyers, right? It's about the people that are actually providing the information, the data. I mean, they have probably the most control over what we see, and prioritizing responsible sources sounds like a responsible idea that should be implemented. Natalie, I know you've had, and I really admire your criticism of how things are, and some of the limitations on the ethical rules and regulations that we have. What I would love to hear, and I don't want to catch up, if there's other stuff you want to talk about, feel free to. But one thing I was thinking was, how should it be? Like, how should the rules work, and what kind of regulation should we have, especially in light of all this?
Yeah, spending a lot of time thinking about that, as you note. I don't know that I have the answer for how best it can work, but we know that what we're doing now is generally not working. And I have just a couple of reactions within this question from some of the things we've heard today and some of the things I've been thinking about. I really applaud the European Parliament for their approach to looking at AI regulation in general, because it is involved, it's centered on risk management. We've had a lot of conversations in the US about a risk-based regulatory system, but right now we don't have that. Tom, you mentioned how consumers are actually affected, and my response to that is, in the US at least, the regulatory system doesn't care how consumers are affected. We don't regulate based on whether consumers are harmed or not. What we regulate, particularly in the unauthorized practice of law, which is what we're talking about here with respect to generative AI, we are regulating to protect people from unqualified and unlicensed providers. We're not regulating to protect people from the outcomes that may result from receiving services from those providers. And that's a vastly different regulatory system. So our regulatory enforcement actions based on legal advice are not centered on consumer harm at this point, and they're more often than not brought by consumers. So focusing to a risk-based system allows, I think, the regulator to be a little more proactive in thinking about the potential risks of using these. And on that front, I'll put in a plug against the status quo, but for considering the status quo regulation, we have a jurisdiction in the US that is doing this now, and they're defining legal regulatory frameworks around risks, and they're basing risk against the status quo. So when we're thinking about someone who's generating a letter using ChatGPT or another tool, I actually don't think there's a huge difference. I don't think generative AI is often going to be the difference between a consumer winning against a landlord in that case or a consumer losing against the landlord. I think the consumer is likely always going to lose because they have the responsibility of looking for all the relevant legal information, finding relevant statutes. Outside of generative AI and before generative AI, they're just making that stuff up as they can based on what they can find on the internet, which is imperfect and often wrong. So I think we should be regulating based on risk, and I think that the status quo should be considered, that the use of these tools is not within some perfect environment that otherwise exists. It's within the fact that 80% or so of people, depending on the statistic that you want to use, it's still a lot no matter which statistic, most people aren't able to access the kind of perfect legal system that our regulatory environment envisions with respect to lawyer regulation.
And Sam, I want to let you jump in here too about any thoughts you have about this going forward. What do you think would be a better way?
I'm not entirely sure what a better way is. I definitely agree with Natalie on the risk-based regulation. I live in Florida, and Florida is a very, I would term it over-regulated legal environment. We had a case in the Florida Supreme Court, the Tict case, where Tict was a company that helped people resolve traffic tickets in South Florida. And they got a complaint against them saying they were practicing law without a license. It went all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court, and the Florida Supreme Court sided with the people saying that this was the practice of law, where Tict was really doing what liability insurance companies do, which is, pay a liability claim or hire a lawyer for someone based on their premium amount. There's a very good dissent in that case that talks about how this actually worked. I'd encourage everybody to read it. But Florida is very heavy-handed. And my concern with generative AI is the state bars in the U.S. have a tendency to be very heavy-handed. And the definition of what is and what is not a practice of law is very much I know it when I see it kind of thing for pretty much every state. And that concerns me. I am worried, frankly, that state bars are going to come down and say, they can't answer legal questions, but never say what legal questions are. In the thing that I've been doing, experimenting with asking legal questions to different models, I have noticed a trend lately of them coming back and saying, I'm not a lawyer, or just completely shutting up when it comes to being asked certain questions that implicate legal things or, certain other areas. So it worries me, frankly, because I think these could be a great tool for people that they're already using. How things should be, I think that we should rethink regulation. I think that, people are already doing what we say they shouldn't do and using these tools as lawyers, and as members of the public. So I think, we really need to rethink things top to bottom.
And you make a really good point about AI models, like even, let's say GPT-4. It's a fluid thing. Like if you check in on it from week to week, it's actually going to be answering differently. And they've been rolling out patches and fixes and improvements to it. So it's not always the same. So you have to factor that, that change into it too. Since we have a few minutes left, I'd like to kind of do a round robin with you to answer this question really, which is that we've talked about examples of generative AI in the wild. We've talked about like the advantages and disadvantages to using it, ethical concerns, all of that. And I guess I want to end on a note of hope. Like what is something that you would hope would come from this? Like let's say in the next couple of years, like what is some problem or advantage that the general populace can benefit from by using generative AI? So what is that? I guess what is that dream? Amanda?
Oh, geez. I'm going to be kind of radical on this. And actually, if you think about it, it's not that radical because I'm building in a failsafe. But ultimately, what I would like to see is a combination of this movement for non-lawyer advocates to be paired with this technology and really strengthen the ability of both to provide services to that huge swath of the public that's not being served. I think those human relationships are extremely important when we're talking about access to justice issues because they're a lot of time. Well, number one, a legal issue is just stressful in general. A lot of times, I think there's a reason they call lawyers counselors sometime, and it's not for the reason that you think it is. Lawyers end up being, on the receiving end of a lot of grief and strife from clients, especially in legal aid. I think that human element is really important for that piece of the resolution of an issue that's beyond the transactional element of it. But I also think that the technology is there that if we can back that up with that support network of providers, that we have a really good solution to a really big problem.
That sounds great. How about you, Aleksandr? Just like one quick thought about that.
Yeah, I would certainly hope that as generative AI systems, they are not automated decision-making systems, which should really be the focus of regulatory concern, because in automated decision-making systems are making automated decisions about life-changing situations about people. And here, there should be really the focus of regulation, as opposed to generative AI systems, which are really productivity tools, mostly, which help people, which help non-professionals and professionals to achieve certain results, which are not predetermined, and the outputs could still be either scrapped or used based on what the person himself or herself decides, right? So it's very important not to have some heavy-handed regulation brought down upon generative AI systems in particular, because it doesn't make sense from my perspective. Another hope from my side would be in architectural improvement of the systems themselves, and this is already happening, and I'm using myself also, a little bit sort of a newer generation tools which you can try out as well, which provide, for example, hyperlinks to the segments of information they output. So you could really make use of those hyperlinks to check whether the outputs are hallucinated or grounded in some proper legal sources, for example, right? So I believe there is a great potential in that regard to have like hyperlinked information, citations, and so on. And this is already happening. And I think generative AI systems with those features would likely be much more dependable and useful also for the general population.
Thank you, Aleksandr. How about you, Sam?
For me, my hope is that people using these systems will continue to use them, to solve legal problems. Frankly, there's Tom, you said, and Natalie, you said, there's a huge percentage of the U.S. population that can't afford a lawyer and are too rich, quote unquote, and rich being relative. It's very, very low in annual income to qualify for a free lawyer with legal aid. That's a huge segment of the population. I would hope that, these tools continue to evolve and become more trustworthy, where people can use them to solve their routine legal matters, even if they don't realize that they're a legal matter. In the US, we have areas where people who aren't lawyers are able to give qualified legal advice, like in immigration, and applying for government benefits. People in prison can qualify as prison law clerks in certain states and act as a lawyer for other people in prison. The precedent is there for these kinds of, regulatory systems, but I don't want us to overregulate it. I also would like to see the big providers like Google, Anthropic, Meta with Llama, OpenAI, to really think deeply about what it means when people come to their systems and ask it deep, personal, substantial, and impactful questions. I know they're thinking about this with healthcare, but they also need to think about it in the legal field as well and decide on how are we going to make sure our systems, provide not just accurate answers, but ones that actually help people and are responsive. So that's my hope. To me, it remains to be seen.
Thanks, Sam. And to give you the last word, Natalie.
Well, Tom, it's not my forte talking about optimism and hope, but I guess I'll give it my best shot. I think in the private sector, I would love to see these tools become trusted and sophisticated enough to actually deliver legal advice in many, I don't want to say low level, but more common instances of legal problems that people around the country struggle with. Paired with that, I'll echo what Amanda said. I think given some of the technology challenges too across the country, humans are going to be an intermediary, an important one in the near future, if not longer term future. So in areas where there are a lot of underserved and where technology might not be evenly distributed, I think humans in pair with technology is crucial. In the public sector, the court system specifically, I would love to see in the future these tools become part of court processing and procedural wayfinding. In order to maintain neutrality, of course, courts would have to allow litigants to have some sort of direction over the strategy and the decision making around what route they want to go with their legal matter. But from there's so much that just can be streamlined and automated using these tools. And I would hope that courts can embrace that. Along with that, though, courts are going to really need to figure out how to change their service model, because that kind of increased efficiency in the courts, at least in the United States, would utterly disrupt the flow of the system. They're just not prepared for that kind of, I think, bandwidth and efficiency from consumers. So I think those at a high level are my thoughts. You might have thought I would say meaningful regulatory reform, but I think some of these changes are going to happen irrespective of whether we have regulatory reform. And in some cases, that might be a good thing, and in some cases, that might not.
Well, I definitely agree with you on that. I hope that things change for the positive sooner rather than later, especially by making it, giving us a framework where people are protected from the downside, but not restricting them from getting the help that they need. I want to thank you all so much, Sam, Natalie, Aleksandr, and Amanda, for contributing to this panel about the impact of generative AI and the provision of legal services. I think it's a great discussion. It's been ongoing, and I think we've done a great job today contributing to that. And so I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and also to thank Global Legal Tech Hub for hosting us. Really appreciate it, and look forward to next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.